Alright guys, hope you're doing really well. Today is part one of our last two videos on what we're going to be doing for the remainder of this year. Through my Zoom meetings, I found out that most of you guys just pretty much wanted to do a brief overview of the remainder of U.S. history. It was really close. It was either this or go through briefly the continents of Asia and Africa. And this one actually won out, so we'll do this. And you have a timeline worksheet. You have two of them. You have one for this video and you have one for next week's video. Basically, you're just going to be filling in the events in order, and there's a few other questions in between. Make sure you do those. Those are your last grades. And other than that, let's get right to it. That being said, this is a lot of U.S. history in about 15 minutes. So I'm going to be as brief as I can and basically try to summarize this. But you're going to be spending basically quarters on this stuff. But I hope it gives you a bit of an understanding of just the timeline to get to where we are now. I basically am doing World War I and Great Depression today. And then next video is going to be World War II to the Iron Curtain falling. So let's get right to it. So for the remainder of our time, I'm going to give you a brief summary overview of the remainder of U.S. history. You have a timeline worksheet. It's not this one right here, but you get the idea. You're going to be putting the events in order. These are going to be your final two daily grades, one today, one next week, so make sure you're doing them. But let's dive right to it. Now, there's a lot of U.S. history between Civil War Reconstruction to World War I. And if you're interested in them, I mean, right here is where they're at. Whether it be Hawaii being annexed into the U.S., we go to war with Spain over Cuba. The Panama Canal is constructed, so you don't have to go around the continents anymore to get to the Pacific Ocean. You can literally just cut through Central America. But we're going right to Ferdinand's assassination for World War I. So, World War I. Short summary of World War I. It all starts with this man, even though this is a picture, not like an actual picture, although there are actual pictures at this time, just not so much of the actual assassination. There was an archduke, which is just a government position in the Austrian-Hungary Empire, by the name of Ferdinand Franz, who will be assassinated by some people in Yugoslavia, also Serbia. It's Serbia today, it was Yugoslavia back then, who were not too pleased with the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, so they killed one of their leaders in acts of vengeance. And that's how World War I starts. But how does, that doesn't answer the question of, how this is Austria-Hungary at the time. I hope you guys like this. I looked for a map picture on Google, and this was the first one I got, and I'm like, this is adorable. How does these two getting involved in a war end up getting the entire world in a war? Well, it basically was the concept with the alliance system. You know how you have friends who have your back? If someone literally was punching your friend, you'd go up and punch them also because it's hey, that's my friend and stuff like that. Well, basically the world was like that. So you have a fight between Austria-Hungary and Serbia, Yugoslavia back then, Serbia today, but there was friends involved with this World War I. So in other words, because Serbia was friends with Russia, now Russia's like, hey, you can't do that to my friend in Serbia. I'm going to have to attack you guys. Well, Austria-Hungary also had friends. So it was like Germany, which I know Germany is more like here in today's map, but back then it was like this. Germany was like, oh, no, you can't attack our friends in the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. So now Germany is fighting Russia and Serbia. But then at the same time, Russia has friends. So it was like, France was like, hey, basically Russia is our flag, flipped. So we got to help out our friends in Russia. And it was now you have France versus Germany versus Austria-Hungary, and these two versus Russia, France, and Serbia. And then suddenly Germany's like, well, I can take France out quite easily, so I'm going to just do that real quick. But they invaded through Belgium, which literally was an ally to the British. And now the British are like, you can't invade Belgium. So it's now the British are involved with this. And it goes on and on and on. But basically, because of one little assassination, which was between these two countries, because of something known as an alliance system, everybody in the world was basically at war at this point. And it doesn't mean that every country was at war, but every powerful country was at war at this point. So that's how you get there. So it was supposed to be the war to end all wars because of the sheer magnitude of this war. I mean, you're talking about this is a war where you see planes and you see tanks and you see machine guns, you see mortars, you see a whole lot more messy stuff. You see trench warfare, you see flamethrowers, you see mustard bombs, all this different stuff. It was bad. As in, like, we hadn't seen a war in history like this. And people in the US, once we eventually joined it, say, like, we need to go there and fight the war to end all wars. Like, they couldn't imagine a war that could be even worse than this. I wish I could spend more time talking about World War One because it's really, really fascinating. But I know there's some pretty awesome films that have come out relatively recently. I think it was 1919 that came out or something like that. I don't know. Uh, you guys will enjoy learning about World War One. It is very, very, very fascinating. But the question remains, like, like how does the U.S. get involved with this? Well, the U.S. decided to stay neutral for the most part because it was like, let the Europeans duke it out. We were friends with the British and the French, but it was like, that's not our continent, and we do not want to send people into tanks, into planes, into mustard gas, and flamethrowers without a good reason. But eventually, Germany gave us that very good reason when they sunk the Lusitania, which was a ship. Now, this was a cruise ship, just like your Titanics and your, like, cruise liners, but it was actually secretly holding a bunch of weapons that we were giving to the British and the French, because even though we weren't necessarily sending soldiers over to Europe, we still wanted our friends to win. So it was called the Lend-Lease program. It's like, hey, take our guns and stuff like that and go win so that way we can continue being friends. So with that being said, the Germans were like, well, we're not going to let you just give them basically the U.S. armory to defeat us, so we're going to sink your ships. And they do. But imagine when you see on the news that this cruise liner literally was sunk and a bunch of U.S. civilians just died when we're supposed to be neutral in the war. Well, at that point, we no longer were neutral. Woodrow Wilson will ask Congress to declare war. It'll still take 2 years afterwards, but that's basically what got the ball rolling that got us into the war. And long story short, we are going to win it. I mean, I wish I could go into more detail about how we win it and stuff like that, but obviously I got 2 days to go through a whole bunch of different U.S. history to try to appease you all. Long story short, we will win that. It was because of U.S. involvement that we do win that. Most likely France and the British and the Russians would have lost if the U.S. did not get involved. It was shaky for us at the beginning, but America is America, and that's pretty self-explanatory. So we win it. Let's move on to the next big point in the timeline, which is the 1920s. I kind of wanted to bring the 1920s in the sense of, like, imagine if you were living in the 1920s. So you live in the 1920s. Life is going great in the roaring 20s, like super, super great. The war is over, and we're in a situation where the economy is booming. Like, people are getting rich fast, and people are making money quickly, and people are being able to make decisions that they've never made before. You see that car on the screen right there? Well, back in the Civil War times, you didn't have that decision no matter how much money you had to get something like that. But now you could. Decisions during the Roaring Twenties was stuff that people never had even fathomed that they could do. And basically, the Roaring Twenties is as such. It's like one big party. You have choices on choices on choices. Like, you have responsible choices like school. No longer was it like, hey, there's the one school in like a 50-mile radius, although if you still lived in like North Dakota, that would be the case. You had more choices for schools. You had better chances of getting better education. And you even had universities at this stage of U.S. history. Like, this is a picture of the University of Michigan back in 1920. You had stuff like college football. You had stuff like graduating classes, degrees, stuff like that. It's very much resemblance to what you guys experience today in the U.S. You no longer have to just necessarily be thrown into a factory because you know how to turn a wrench and stuff. You could potentially make it big to where you can throw these really big house parties if you so desire. Hence the Roaring Twenties. It was like one big crazy party. That being said, that kind of also holds true today. So here's your little public service announcement. You probably remember it from last year from your budget project, but people with higher educations usually have a higher rate of return. So when people are starting to go to like the universities and stuff like that, they're getting smarter, and that's one of the reasons why the economy was booming because people were making much more sound economic decisions. That's kind of even speaks volumes even today. I mean, if the statistics are true, which are kind of just your results may vary, um, people who get degrees are going to earn a whole lot more money than people who do not. As you saw last year in your budget project, I mean, the ones with the biggest salaries were the ones that required the most education. So with that being said, and if you think about it, it can be a pretty good lucrative investment even today. This is kind of my PSA to you guys because you guys are getting into high school now. Um, Even if you end up paying like $100,000 on tuition, if you're going to earn up to $1 million more in your lifetime, that's kind of worth. Which I'm pretty sure most of you guys know that, but I thought I'd mention it because this is where you see this time period happening where people are getting a whole lot wealthier. Well, that being said, life is good in the 1920s. Like, this is literally a picture of the 1920s, like an actual picture of the 1920s of people just throwing these crazy parties because everybody's really rich and wealthy and stuff like that. I mean, they're not like everybody has like a limo wealthy, but like people who are investing into like stocks and stuff are extremely wealthy. And companies are growing because people are buying new goods are coming out, cars are becoming a thing, planes are becoming a thing, all this different technology. It's just crazy during the 20s, hence the name Roaring 20s. And banks are loaning out money like crazy because that's one thing for economics is that banks loan out money and then companies use that money and then they ultimately make a better company, make a better iPhone, whatever it may be. Uh, and also just FYI, if you don't remember it from civics last year, banks, that's what a bank does. When you deposit your money into a bank, they don't just keep it in the vault and do nothing with it. They loan it out to people so that way they can do what they so fit with it. Buy the new car, invest into new technology, whatever it may be. They just expect that money to be paid back with interest, which is interest is money you pay on top of a loan. So if like I'm the bank and I loan you $100, I'm expecting like $110 back, not $100. But that was a-okay during this time period, like, because with the economy booming the way it was, you could literally borrow money from the bank, go invest it into some stocks, and then sell those stocks when they're worth a whole lot more, and then you can literally pay off the bank's interest and then pocket the rest. I mean, it was a crazy, crazy time period. And as long as those banks don't fail, you'll be good to go. And as long as the stock market is good, you'd be good to go. And also, that's how stocks work in general. Like, if you don't remember it from last year, I mean, when you buy a stock, you're buying a very small percentage of ownership in that company. And as that company grows and becomes more successful and it becomes more desirable, supply and demand, people want to buy that stock more and it's worth more. Like Amazon back in early 2000s was less than $100 a share. Now that Amazon is such a more successful company, it's nearly $2,000 a share. Um, Obviously, there's huge rewards as the company grows that you could sell the stock and make a whole lot of money. But if the company does go bankrupt, you lose it all. So maybe you guys can kind of see where I'm setting the stage here, where it's like the economy is doing really, really, really well. And as long as the stocks market doesn't crash, and as long as those banks don't fail, everything is a-okay until the Great Depression. I like that where you had those two different charts because it literally you saw that the economy was booming, but now you can see how bad it's going to go down. October 24th, 1929, forever known as Black Tuesday. That is when the stock market just literally took a turn for the worse. It was bad. Like literally, imagine if you had invested a day before in let's say Ford stock, and let's say Ford stock was worth like $20 a share back then, and let's say you paid $20 for that share of Ford stock, which is a huge chunk of money back then, and then the next day it was worth $1 a share. You just basically lost all of your money the next day because stocks market crashed. People weren't buying as much as they were before, and people were kind of out of money. So money was basically was wiped out, and people's fortunes were gone. And the stock market, though crashing, did not cause the Great Depression, though, because the stock market crashes all the time. It goes through its cycles. Sometimes it has high moments, sometimes it has low moments. You only lose the value of those stocks. That shouldn't cause a depression where literally the economy just gets destroyed. I mean, even if you invest in stocks, you still have your money in your bank account, right? Maybe seeing that picture of Andrew Jackson right there might kind of give you the hint I'm trying to point out. Remember, Andrew Jackson didn't trust the banks? The people in the 20s and early 30s shouldn't have trusted those banks either. Those banks ultimately fail because those banks don't hold on to all the money that they take in. They loan it out. So when the stock market crashed, people panicked and it was like, I just got to get to the bank and grab as much cash as I can and basically survive as long as I can so I can be able to still buy stuff like food and water and all that different stuff. Well, banks don't keep all that money on hand. So if a bank has $1 million of people's money and they loan out $750,000 of it, but yet all those people who had that money all come to that bank and say, hey, I want to withdraw it, they don't have that money anymore. They lent it out so that way they could make money. And this is a picture from the 1930s of exactly that happening. People literally waiting in line with banks that are closed because they simply didn't have the money to give back the money they owed to people. And that's what led to a depression. But don't we have like a government agency or something like that to protect us from that? Yeah, we do. It's called the Federal Reserve, and it did exist back then. The whole point of the Federal Reserve is to basically tell banks, hey, you should have this much money on hand in case people go and try to withdraw it all. So that way you're always protected. And they can even lend money to banks on a temporary basis saying, hey, we feel like the economy is going to go really down and that there's quite a good possibility that people might go to the banks and you might not have enough money. So here's like X amount of dollars. Just give it back to us if you don't use it, essentially. And if you eventually do give it back to us, because that's not free money. So the Federal Reserve was there. Shouldn't they have prevented this depression? They're the ones who caused that depression, actually, because they're the ones who told the banks keep as little money on hand as possible because you want as much money as possible in the stock markets because the economy was booming. People were making fortunes overnight. And when it crashed hard. And these are pictures from the 1930s of the Great Depressions. I mean, I can't imagine what it was like to be in that time period. I mean, I know the economy right now is doing pretty badly because of this whole coronavirus thing, but there is the expectation it will rebound because once we get out of quarantine, the economy will go back to running on cylinders. It might take a while to recover, but you get the idea. These guys had no idea what was going to happen. There was no guarantee of anything at that point. So it was bad. The Great Depression was bad for America. Now, there were some things that came out of the Great Depression that have impacted the U.S. tremendously over the years. You did have stuff like the New Deal. FDR was the one who created the New Deal, which basically was like, maybe the government should be involved to help out people in hard times. You see stuff like that even today. We just had something like that during the coronavirus with the stimulus package. Now, the stimulus package is not the New Deal. The New Deal was much bigger than a stimulus package. It was like a broad sweeping changes of everything. But this was something that happened, that the government was getting involved to help out people on hard times. And that's where you get your idea of welfare even today. You might have heard stuff like Social Security checks before, maybe in passing and stuff like that. That comes from this time period, the Great Depression, the idea that the government is going to help you if you get on hard times. Whether you're low income or no income, the government has your back. Not every country does that. Be very, very fortunate you live in a country that actually will do that. Because in some countries, if you get into poverty, you're just tough. We have stuff like this today, yet we're talking about stuff in the Great Depression. The reason I'm pointing it out is because that's stuff that's in 2020, like welfare, that started in the Great Depression in the 30s. But anywho, now truth be told, and I have no idea why the picture isn't showing when I'm making this video, but just imagine a meme right there. The New Deal did help people, but it ultimately prolonged the Depression because it didn't fix the problems that made the Depression. A, the stock market was still down. B, people were not buying and selling as much as they used to. And C, the banks ultimately failed. The ultimate thing that's going to get the United States out of this big depression is going to be World War II. And that's where I'm going to leave you guys today. So make sure you go through that worksheet, fill in those events in the right order, and answer any questions that are there as well. And then on the next video, which is going to be our last video for U.S. history in 8th grade, we're going to talk about World War II, very briefly, the key events of World War II, and then what happens to the U.S. between then with like Korea, Vietnam, the space race, civil rights movement, the Cold War, all that different stuff, to basically where you guys are at today with the internet age. But other than that, guys, I hope you're doing really well. If you have any questions, by all means, shoot me an email. Otherwise, I'll see you guys later.